Thank you, everybody, for coming in. I know it is kind of cloudy, kind of sunny, almost feels like it'll rain. I felt cold with my Indian attire that I'm wearing today, so thank you again for showing up. Of course, as Christine mentioned, I have been, you can touch me and see how cold I am getting, and I am feeling nervous, especially because I have never felt so tall. Never in my life. Taller than so many people. I report to, I work with, I teach. So, namaste to everybody. Namaste in my language and my culture means I respect the divine in you. The divine in me respects the divine in you. So, namaste to everybody. Konnichiwa to my Japanese students. Good afternoon. And again, thank you for coming by. As Christine mentioned, I think, and as the presentation will go, you will realize that community engagement was hardly organic with me. I also learned it in the difficult way. So as it is titled, I kind of slightly tweaked it, raw, real, and radical. So what is raw? It comes directly from the field, real, absolute, true experiences that I would be talking about. And radical because some of the things we tend to homogenize a lot or think that it is kind of easy. So getting into some of the complexities of it, some of the aspects of where we need to, even as researchers, some research activism possibly is needed or possibly is required or even recommended in the domain of community engaged research. Uh, I will begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land that Fort Lewis College is situated upon is the ancestral land and territory of the Nuchu Ute people who were forcibly removed by the United States government. We also acknowledge that this land is connected to the communal and ceremonial spaces of the Jicarilla Apache, that's the Apache Pueblos of New Mexico, Hopi Sinom, that's Hopi, and Diné Navajo nations. It is important to acknowledge the setting because the narratives of the lands in this region have long been told from dominant perspectives without full recognition of the original land stewards who continue to inhabit and connect with this land. Thank you for your attention and gratitude once again for coming by. It is so amazing that something which I read here resonates so much across one of the African sayings can be paraphrased as one of the Maasai sayings, which can be paraphrased something as long as the hunter would write our story, the lion is always killed. So different communities have expressed in different ways through their songs, through their folklores, through their drawings, through their cave paintings, different ways of one, questioning the power play in the society per se, questioning the whole aspect of how much of popular knowledge is appreciated or not appreciated. And we will delve into some of those examples for sure. It is such a deep area, such an emotional and area for me, more than just my work per se, that it is very difficult to kind of say everything. But what I'll do is take snippets of some of those examples and kind of discuss them. I'm sure that this presentation is it is absolutely my own personal experiences, my own meaning making, my own reflections made in the context of the communities of partnership and communities of research that I worked with would not have been possible without my advisors who guided me to think in a certain way or drove me or even pushed me at times when I was hesitant to even work on certain topics or was like, how do I even do something like this? Of course, communities of research who allowed me to delve into their own private lives, confidential lives, not so sacrosancted or stereotypical lives in many of the cases, as Christine mentioned. Most of my work has been with sex workers, male and female, trans people, children of prisoners, orphan and vulnerable children. So it takes, if it is so difficult for us, just think for it once, if it is so difficult for us or so challenging even to share our own vulnerabilities, imagine it being shared to somebody called a researcher for a purpose called research, for whose gain many a times these communities not even get a flavor of that gain. So of course, thanks to all my advisors, all my communities, all my students who many a times gave me tips, I was like, how do I even design it? And they were like, you can do it. You tell stories. And yeah, I can see those smiles out there. Some of them even set my level higher, telling that you are a true TED Talk speaker. You did the TEDx speaking, and you should be able to do a TED like speaking. So I understood that all the tricks which I use with them, they actually used it with me now. So thanks for all that push. Thank you so much. Of course, grateful to Christine. Wherever you are, I am not able to see you at all. Okay, you are right there. So Christine, theater department, Cats, who did all the sticking around of all the microphone and everything, and all these setting is right because they are there. So thank you again, everybody. The photographs, I will be using a lot of photographs, and I have tried to take verbal consent of people whose photographs have been used. Now, this was, I think, the most challenging slide in terms of what should be the pickup line? What should be the pickup line so that my community here and now gets there with me? And so, I don't know, this was a painting which I did before visiting the arches. And the other one is, of course, a photograph I took when I was visiting it. And there was a question which came that how did you feel when you did the painting, and how did you feel when you went there? Of course, the feelings were different. Both had their own sense of vulnerabilities. I knew it kind of looked something like that, but when I went there, the slipperiness of the stone, 2 hours of climbing, and I'm like, where are the arches, man? If they're so high and so tall, why do I not even see them? So, of course, those are not the feelings which I got when I was painting. When I was painting it, it was a sense of, well, I have not yet seen it, but I still can capture it on my canvas. So that was the sense. Almost similar happens with community or community engagement. All of us possibly know what communities mean like, look like. All of us almost intuitively know that some amount of sensitivity is required, acculturation is required, being with them in their spaces, attentive listening skills, all of these things. Tell me one of you who would not know about it. Of course we know about it. Of course we know about it. And thus, why is Tapati Dutta even standing here and trying to tell what? Maybe possibly some of the spices. I come from the world of spices, so some of the spices, some of the things which makes it more layered, and those are some of the examples through stories, stories and photographs, so it will be more like photo story that I would be sharing. A quick thing also, what we remember from the previous slide was, remember COVID? Or have we forgotten it? We remember it, right? It's kind of a known concept. And there were two things. One was the solidarity trial. The clinical trial was named as solidarity trial by the World Health Organization, with, of course, with that notion that all the 193 countries across the world participate in it. Versus there was also something called Operation Warp Speed of the clinical trial, the name of the trial in which that the vaccine is coming fast. Tell me what it did to the world. People got rather worried about the speed of it. That how did they even do it? Some conspiracy theory, something like that. So semantics matter. Many a time semantics matter, and thus getting the pulse of the community right is absolutely important. So these are some of my photographs. The first one, of course, is with my mom and dad. I am a 70s born. Gives you quite of an idea of that my hair is half colored and half originally black. The next is growing up years, and the third one is very emotional when I decided to come to the US. So it is the boarding pass, 9th of August, 10th of August, reaching here, 11th of August is my birthday. And so I reach here without a laptop, without a phone connection. And so that is the most recent photograph. What was happening in the country, and so growing up in India, 70s was so 75, so while I don't really remember it, that was the first year when the Prime Minister declared an emergency. The media rights were kind of curbed. Media couldn't publish whatever they wanted. The maximum, in my childhood years, the maximum exposure of media is through radio, which I would remember. 80s, if I would say of anything of which I remember was Rakesh Sharma, who went to the space. What I remember again is the role of radio, all of us gluing our ears because that day the Prime Minister of the country is talking to the person in the space who is Rakesh Sharma. And the question was asked was, how do you feel from the space? How does India look like? And his response was in Hindi, what it said was, Sare jahan se acha, which means my country looks the best from the space. But while me as a 10-year or 9-year-old, while I didn't say have any sense of nation, nationality, citizenship, country, anything at that age, but something which still stands in my mind is you belong to a bigger world. You just don't belong to your family. So those connections were much macro than even I could comprehend. 90s was very exciting for all of us. Globalization happened. We saw a lot of Pepsi bottles coming into our stores. We saw a lot of McDonald's stores showing up. But how business worked, business was also trying to understand what indigenous palatability looked like. So the picture out here is Mac Maharaja. Maharaja is the king. So a lot of Indian spices being used while the brand is still McDonald's, but Indian spices and Indian palatability is taken care of. And this is very recent. Year 2000, I remember there was this huge fright and computers had just come in. And the only thing we were told was, we might lose all our data tomorrow when it becomes 2001. Oh, no, when it becomes 2000. So 1999, 31st December night was all night awake in our offices, just seeing that the data is not going anywhere. And there are more scary things to come. So this is in the context of the macro, how I saw the world and how I could connect. Milestones at my personal end were also, I would say, fascinating, interesting, colorful. My dad became blind when I was in that 80s range. When I was 8 years old, he lost his job because he became blind and thus couldn't work. Then he died when I was 15. And all that, how I was sensing, how I was feeling as a part of the community or not feeling as a part of the league, had an everything, both the macro and the micro, whether I was going to a McDonald's store or I was not able to afford it. Who was playing with me determined who played with me or who did not play with me, determined which eye doctors I knew, or which were my spaces, my common spaces. And thereafter, for my undergraduation, I studied social work. Two things, both for my undergraduation and graduation. The first one is Vishwabharati University. The person who started it was the Nobel laureate or the Nobel Prize winner in literature, the first South Asian, I think, South Asian Nobel Prize winner. And it is also a UNESCO site for education now, heritage site for education now. And you see how we studied there under the trees. There wasn't any, this is a non-COVID scenario. So we studied under the trees in amidst nature, both for TIS and for Vishwabharati. Two of the major important things which I wanted to mention is a lot of experiential learning, including fieldwork used to be absolute cardinal. So which means we were given a village or an institution where we had to work for 2 days in a week and 3 days were in classroom. Possibly that was my beginning of how I even learned how to work with communities, how I learned which were the institutions, how to organize a village level meeting, how to organize a blood donation camp in a community, how to organize sports some sports related thing between two schools. So all of these organizational abilities, how to barge into a house or how to get into a household and start talking to a man who is possibly a domestic, who is possibly violent with his wife. How do you even make your inroads to community even as case studies or group organizations or community organizations? Those are possibly how it began. I began learning it. Much later, this is International Institute of Population Sciences, and this is where I learned about the numbers. So while TIS and Vishwabharati taught me more about case studies and qualitative, This is an organization which counts, and you can see every day they change the number to what is the population of the country. You can see that number. So this is a date in 2021 when that was the population. I don't want to read it out. We are highest in populations now. 80s, another thing happened. One was in the country as emergency was declared, many people were forcibly actually almost dragged from their houses to for contraception because population increase was seen as a deterrent to development. So governments did whatever they could, but unfortunately, possibly with a great intent, but unfortunately communities were not consulted in the right way. And so you see something, a quote from the BBC report which says an astonishing 6.2 million Indian men were sterilized in just a year, which was 15 times the number of people sterilized by the Nazis, and 2,000 men who died in the whole process. This was happening. So at one level when you saw this, another which most of my public health colleagues and friends would know, this is the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. 1980s, the first case of HIV was diagnosed. This is CDC report where they're telling that we are seeing something uncanny between among men who have sex with men. Not yet sure. Some of them are thinning, wasting, having prolonged fever, but it is not yet diagnosed. But this gave rise to a lot of non-profit organizations and starting to work, and most of the work was around sensitization, mostly around safe sex behaviors, population control. But that was the time when we saw a lot of mushrooming of non-profit organizations. And in those days, we used to say NGOs with the name of, we always thought that NGOs means, we used to say non-governmental organizations, meaning to also meant that when the government is not able to do something, the organizations is doing it. Of course, we have moved many decades from there. The understanding of nonprofits have changed a lot. That's how I got drawn into the domain of public health, domain of HIV, domain of sexual reproductive health in the beginning, and thus got to work with some of these people called hidden populations. Because it was happening, as I mentioned, HIV was happening, but first they did not know that it could happen even with general populations. General populations, again, sorry for the technical words, means people who have monogamous or who are assumed or believed to have monogamous relationships, mostly married men. That also led us to realize that if medicines are there, treatment centers are there, it is not just enough. Because for the first time, we were realizing there is something called stigma, whether it is externally driven or within self-stigma, a reason for which many of even when the facilities are there, people are not getting to the centers, people are not getting tested, and more people were getting infected out there. So that was possibly one of the reasons where social workers were thought to be important. Until then, I did not have a public health degree. So social workers were thought to be important in terms of ethically talking about things, sensitively interacting with people, and getting to them in terms of understanding why they show up in clinics, or what should the clinics do to do better, and so that people show up. Much later, and as many of you know, I am a non-traditional age group student. I started my studying in my terminal degree of PhD in public health from Indiana University. Of course, when I suggested that I want to study community engagement, it was half and half with my advisory committee. Half of them was like, what is community engagement? Why do you want to study that? One of them called me up and dropped out from the advisory board. And me here, one immigrant at 40 who has come to the US, I was like, possibly I'm doing something utterly wrong, absolutely wrong, that somebody has even left my advisory committee. Thanks to those of my advisory committee members, those who remained, those who pushed me, but who said that it is your car, you will drive it, we are there to guide you, but don't leave your dreams, don't leave your passion. And that is where I studied uh, community engagement for vaccination uptake, wherein I interviewed a lot of global level vaccine decision makers, not understanding from the ground what should happen, but up there, that what do you think community is and what do you think community engagement should be for the uptake of any biomedical tools per se. So two things which I realized throughout this journey was, one was community and community engagement had a very different gaze by disciplines. Social work saw it differently, public health saw it even more from a health promotion and disease prevention approach. Social work saw it more from a case study and empathy approach. Um, my degree in another degree in from Wageningen University, which was more on participatory planning, management, and evaluation. For the first time, I realized that such a course even existed. So many times we don't even know the length and breadth of how the pedagogic environment is changing per se. So this is kind of a global map of where all I have worked or researched or done my internship, and also some kind of research relationship which I have developed. But what I have understood through that whole journey is experiences can be huge. I'm sure in this room there are several individuals who have traveled to more number of countries or visited more number of individuals or communities much than I have. But end of the day, what also matters is reflection of those experiences. That matters the most. That makes you understand, that made me at least understand the mistakes I did, the things which I should have done differently. So one thing, of course, that I understood was communities are not homogeneous. Like squashes are not, communities absolutely are not homogeneous. So when we even talk about communities, and within those communities also there are layers. Trust me, and within those individuals also there are communities. So layers of communities, there is community within us as much as we think that we are also part of communities. Not that just they look different, or they eat different, or they dress different, but or they are educated in a different way, or they sense inequity in different levels or in different ways. But as you see out here, the picture of the bus, I have intentionally put this picture because in one of my classes, when I was a graduate student at Indiana University, and I was a assistant, whatever, instructor, assistant instructor out there, and I was very fluently talking about a crowded bus, and I saw blank faces of students. And most of them were like, why would somebody board a crowded bus? Why should something even be crowded? They can take the next bus. So I had to actually show them pictures that how a densely populated country even looks like, how that there might be buses not every 10 minutes or 20 minutes, but once in 3 days. How if that many a times it has happened with me also personally. Something happened with the driver, and the driver's son running to us and telling, hey, go back home and cook your rice. My dad is not driving the bus today. My dad is not coming today. The, uh, the cow has given birth to a calf. Most of the times in my village, that would be the story. The cow has given birth to a calf and the driver is not showing up. So here, I still get amazed that only with one passenger Durango Transit is still running. So it is still a matter of surprise to me. So we kind of board different transports. Our playgrounds are different. We all teach social determinants of health, and look at the water buffalo and how the kids are playing out there. Our breakfast tables could look very different. What we are eating, absolutely different. Our water storages could be in old jerrycans, and the cap could be plantains, because plantains happens in abundance there. How we go to school looks different, and how today people in Gaza are getting vaccinated could look very different than a clinical setup. So communities look, one has to understand that whole feel, that whole sentiment, that whole pulse when we are getting in touch with these communities. Of course, community engagement has a range, and this is from the study which I did with global vaccine decision makers. And I was pretty much surprised, though for researchers' bias sake, I was not supposed to react. One of the responses was imposing of vaccination, and if you see the quote says, we had to hire a muscle man to convince people, resistant communities, during the Japanese encephalitis vaccine. And to that person, that was the highest form of community engagement he did by forcing people out, using a muscle man to get the person vaccinated. And these are all there in PLOS One, so these are all published, so you can also refer to them. Another quote, the more empowered quote looked like this, that the media was against me, but then my CAB, meaning my community advisory board, said that don't worry, we will do whatever needs to be done. We will do the rejoinder and we will do everything. So you see there is a range. Roger Hart's ladder of participation, if any of you are interested in community engagement and community participation, talks a lot about how some communities are manipulated to participate in certain research or in certain program, versus how certain communities are empowered to become, and then it is communities become the center stage of the process. Some of these studies also came out with these findings that one, community engagement cannot be a bunch of interventions at the ground level. There has to be a political will. It has to be an upstream policy imperative. It has to be from, and this is also APHA's, that is American Public Health Association's vision, that it is not just trustful relationships. It is trust, it has to be trustworthiness, meaning trust which is more sustainable between communities and researchers. That has to be built. And more transparent communication, something which we had a lot of difficulty with in most of the vaccine trials or most of the vaccine-related communication, was how do we demystify science? We were just yesterday in one of our classes, we were trying to demystify the word pacemaker. That in your local language, in your mother tongue, in my mother tongue, let's think about what is the word for pacemaker. We had this difficulty even when we were translating the COVID language from the CDC website, and I will talk about it. But one of the things is that, like immunopathogenesis, T cells, herd immunity, just name them. Most of the literature, most of research is developed in English and many a times then translated in the local language, and there might be some flaws or some difficulties even to translate them. Another study which talked about gender-sensitive language, gender-responsive language in a policy document, and how it impacted tetanus immunization in Kenya. So one of the findings was, and one of the very new findings which we saw was working not just with the communities of concern or priority populations, which we often, how we tell them or how we specify them, but also working with gatekeeper populations, meaning populations who are coming in the way or resisting that particular program. And more decision makers, more and more policy makers are talking about this, gatekeeper engagement. What kind of strategies do we have to engage with those people who do not want this particular program to happen or are vaccine resistant? In many of my studies, or most of my studies, it was vaccine related or any other biomedical tool. And this particular study was done. We saw an uptake in the tetanus vaccination, all in the backdrop of when misinformation was happening. When Catholic bishops accused the Kenyan government, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization of lacing the tetanus vaccine doses with a fertility inhibiting hormone. Like, in the backdrop of that, it is a very amusing story, and we see that in various other things, that how these bishops thereafter were trained, were sensitized, such that even in church meetings, beginning of that, they would first talk about the vaccines, or there will be some component of discussion which was happening around these topics before they went to their other ceremonies. So many such examples around the world exist. Another example is one study found out that men decided the most in terms of who gets the vaccine or not, whereas women are the ones, mothers are the ones who take them physically to the vaccination center, but men won't listen. So barbers were sensitized that when the person comes to the salon to get his shaving done or the haircut done, so a whole range of barbers were trained that while the haircut is happening, that's the only time, unfortunately, sorry to all the men who are listening now, that's the only time when men are silent. So that strategy was used. And I am predominantly talking about patriarchal settings where many of these, you have to know the culture so beautifully well and weave in within the culture. All of us who have done those beautiful earrings or woven your carpets would know that what is weaving in mean. It has a pattern, it has a tune, it has something to it that one color gets into the other. Nothing stands against it. So when I'm talking about acculturation, a program acculturation to fit into the cultural model of a community, of course, community of inquiry must be built. And you see, in most of the cases, I stand as a minority person. The first one is a village health team member. These are community members who are created by the government in areas where the epidemic is high, where because of reasons of tiredness, lethargy, constant fever, because many people have HIV, people can't even go to the center and get their medications. So there is a group called village health team members who not only sensitize community members, but go to the center, get the medications from the center and deliver it to the community people. Also at times helps them with grocery and stuff like that. And a lot of them, and how do they work? How do most of the systems around the world work through incentivization, that they are not really salaried people by the government, but somewhere they fit into the government structure and they get incentivized. The second one is, I think, the AIDS support organization. And you would see that I think that is Procy's child, and yeah, it has to be a community feeling. The third one is very recent. One of our students, I don't know if Janai, are you here? Yeah, Janai, hi. So this is the place where Janai is doing her internship, and she's teaching these students how to make sanitary pads all through the virtual internship that we are doing. Clap for Janai. Yay, great work. Make me proud. The next one is a religious place in the Middle East, and of course, I had to cover my head, the way they did their prayers, and so how they pray, how they begin, how meetings begin. Some communities do not believe talking while eating. No, yeah, talking while they are eating, whereas some communities believe that that is an optimization of time, that you talk while you eat. So different communities are very different culturally. Like my culture, blowing off a candle means death, versus across most of the countries in the world, blowing off a candle means birthday. Yep. This photograph, the last one, I think the first of its kinds, when first time I was kind of taunted. One of the first times that I was taunted, oh, you work with these kind of people? So it kind of, so that is also there. People who work with the so-called priority populations, people who work with the vulnerable populations, we also do not have a lot of societal guard to protect ourselves. The respect factor, the social gaze is almost like, oh, you do some kind of, there's no science to it, actually. Whereas there is possibly, to understand one of my job descriptions, I still remember, I won't name the organization, it just had one sentence telling, keeping the community pulse alive. For anything, I didn't even know what it meant, but later I came to understand that there was a clinical trial happening, a HIV vaccine clinical trial happening, and they were not getting enough participants to come and participate in a vaccine. Medical doctors, most of vaccinologists, most of the times in this case, did not really know what to tell to the community where there is no clear-cut vaccine. That vaccine won't cure it, but kind of saying, hey, participate in this, and we might get a good result out of it. If good result, it benefits science, but we don't know. So uh, I hope we have come a long way from where I began, from the sense of community engagement, does it even make sense to do a public health research on that topic, to now when I'm seeing more and more even donor organizations. So initially when we were writing grants, it had to be a lot technically heavy. There had to be an ethicist, a social worker, and all those nomenclatures which are there in a grant. Now more and more we saw that, of course, if it's an NIH grant, we would see, or even a Wellcome Trust grant, we are seeing that not just importance of having a community member who is there on the grant, or an institution who is serving these communities on the grant, but they are the centerpiece, whereas we are serving more as technical experts, technical consultants. Most like a recent grant which I was referring to in my one of my ethics lessons, and it was a grant for the transgenders, and the transgender organization, transgender people had to be on the grant, writing the grant, so that you are not faking up trustworthiness. Most of us had become so very smart enough. Oh, I know that community. I have worked there, and I know have great friends out there. Ah, no, yeah. So I think there are a lot of positives. Now, as I said this, there was also another community which I mentioned that with whom I worked with. I did a lot of elite interviews, meaning elite interviews in that context means people who are either higher up in the power or kind of are higher up in that positional power because of their knowledge, because of their background, because of their experience. So here you see a bunch of pictures. Dr. Wayne Koff for mRNA vaccines, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientific Officer at World Health Organization, Geneva, Dr. Shea Welch, with most of my students have met, one of the only 46 Native American. She's at the CDC. She is the Senior Policy Advisor at the CDC. Dr. Judith Lasker, hoping to help. She talks more about global health volunteering and how it should be more of volunteering rather than volunteering. The other lady, VHS at YRG Cares, she not only discovered the first HIV case in India, she also worked a lot on HIV positive people's rights on marriage and adoption. Dr. Emmanuel Luerka worked a lot in the domain of palliative care and changed palliative care policy across the African subcontinent. Dr. Rajesh Tandon, who is the UNESCO Chair for Education, and he used to be my former boss at the Participatory Research in Asia and India. And the next one is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, India office. So with most of these elite interviews, trust me, a very different skill set is required. They are also community. A lot of homework is required. A lot of promptness is required in terms of what do you do and what do you want to understand from. A lot of informal mechanisms worked with me, asking them for a meeting or requesting them for a meeting over possibly a Facebook Messenger and starting with a complete different thing of I just saw your photograph or I just saw your puppy's picture or I just saw that painting. So opening up the pickup line could be absolutely different. I had these wrong experiences of good morning, sir, I am here because this study, and the person is like, I have just 3 minutes and 20 seconds and you have to finish it now. So, so absolute different skills are required when we are working or when we are doing elite interviews. And so that is to be kept in mind, that they are also in the spectrum of the community, they are also communities. Coming to scholarship of teaching and learning in terms of what I have been able to achieve at Fort Lewis College, first of all, thank you for giving me the chance to practice different storytelling methods, photo voice, and you see so many of our students, pictures of so many of them at the Weasel Skin Equestrian Farm. And that works a lot. That works in terms of building classroom community. That works in promoting research or student-centric research, student-led research, because research, unfortunately, as a word in itself, the semantics in itself could be like, no, I have never done it. I am nothing, I cannot do it, you do it for me. But these kind of methods kind of easen the process, loosen the process, while they have extra benefits of enhancing instructor-student relationships. As I mentioned, more and more donors are getting interested to it, so more and more funding also we are seeing in the domain of scholarship and teaching and learning done in creative methods. A quick example also might be like, and this is something which I read in Qualitative Health Research Journal, and this girl who said that she was a PhD scholar who was then diagnosed on the day she got a grant, a research grant, she was diagnosed of breast cancer. And she had to retain that grant while she also did not have, like for sure, anybody who is diagnosed at that age will be like, or any age for that matter, she couldn't do it. But then, at the end of possibly a couple of months, she gathered herself. She was like, I have to do it to at least retain my grants. And I know there will be some, if not many, a few or some, who who work in that model, that I have to, at least to retain my grants, I have to do it. It is not my passion, not my calling now, but I have to do it. And what she did was, she knit a whole muffler. She did a huge knitting of a muffler, which was the designs of her mammogram tests. And what she wrote in her research was a complete reflective autoethnographic thing of how the designs changed over time, how she was coping with it. And so anything can be research, just do it. It just has to have some systematic steps of doing it. Research is not as complicated as possibly some of us scholars have made it. It is as easy as life per se. The whole thing of, if you are thinking, how will I go to school today? Oh, it is cloudy, so let me start a bit earlier. That is also research. And research is life. Research is how we carry out our lives per se. Another is, of course, the global virtual virtual internship, which we kind of did. So a lot of these kind of community engaged models lead to a lot of partnership. Partnership, in this case, partnership was with an Ugandan organization. Many of our students did virtual internship out there, and it is great, and it was a great model of advancing pedagogy, especially during the times of COVID, when we were not allowed or when we could not travel. It also works a lot for many of our students who have the dream of venturing beyond in the foreign boundaries or doing international work, but might not have funding to do the same. I've interacted with several students who, as of yet, might not have a passport for that matter. So it kind of makes them feel that I can also do it. There is an alternative for me. So this is a great example. So community engagement leads to a lot of inclusive pedagogic methodologies also. And yes, how can I end without talking about this? This is another example of doing a lot of this. College gave me the first opportunity to also question a bit of these language revitalization, not question, but do some things in the domain of public health, which was also language revitalization. We wrote a paper on evolution of storytelling in the global health class. We did a vaccine study, COVID vaccine study on campus. So thanks for all of you who participated in that study. It was absolutely not easy to do that during COVID times. We developed a lot of COVID materials in Braille, which, if it is still there in the Disability Center and in the library, it should be there. And one of the studies which I should mention is a multidimensional scale of perceived social support. This is just a simple psychometric scale, has been translated across in the world in 35 languages, and my great students, they were like, oh, we need to translate it in tribal languages also. So ours was the first one. The day it gets published, be sure that we celebrated that ours will be the first one to be translating the MSPSS scale in tribal languages in Dine. So thank you, Camille, and for helping me with getting the research participants and everybody out there. Now the first question out there, this is treated to be one of the globally accepted scales. There is a special person who is around when I am in need. So after all my 25 years of community engagement, I knew that I knew it all. Okay, so that was the blunder which I made. So I planned, okay, 1 hour and 12 questions, 1 hour, done, come back, sleep well, done. It took me around 45 minutes on these questions, and people first rolled into laughter before even translating that. Questions. Why did they laugh? The task was translating it from English to Dine. There is a special person in my life when I need. They laughed and laughed and laughed. And I was like, oh no, this is a globally acclaimed scale. And communities were laughing at it. And their laughter was, we don't even understand this concept of when there is a need, then I am there. We are there with each other always. It is not transactional. It is not need-based. So some of these globally acclaimed tools, time for us also to question that how, when we do, and thus, possibly I had to change a bit in the methods, not in the methods section, but we went translating it and again back translating it to see to it that both the English meaning of it and the Dine philosophy to it is retained out there. So many of the research processes have to be possibly rethought or questioned because there might be a story within a story. So in summary, of course, it increases our emotional intelligence. In most of our leadership positions, we are seeing that emotional intelligence is a sought after attribute that they are looking for. Knowledgeability of traditional engagement norms. Engagement with virtual communities, we are still questioning on that. COVID made us like shift to Zoom immediately, but we possibly don't have all the answers of how do we engage in a better way with with virtual communities. Many of our students, and one of the ways is also during contact tracing, we felt that people were like, oh, I am trying to talk about the disease and the vaccine, and the other person is like, I don't have the money to pay my bills, or I am not able to communicate or coordinate with my family members, or I'm not able to travel. So the problem level was something, the solution was something else, and how the twine will meet. So some of these problems are there. Usage of mother tongue came across as very handy in terms of not just understanding the pulse, but also understanding or appreciating the sentiment, especially for elderly populations. Application of intersectionality lens. This I have heard so many times from most of my HIV positive friends or even gender minority friends, that that is not my only identity. Stop treating me as only the HIV positive person or only the trans person. I have an education, I have a social standing, I have a dog, I can run. Why are they also not part of my identity? So intersectionality allows us to see it from a whole person lens and possibly develop programs from and research from a whole person lens, whole school lens, whole college lens, rather than the subpopulation aspect of doing it. Innovative academic nonprofit collaborative research, which I just mentioned, that our partnership with Uganda might not have happened if, I don't know which came first, the virtual internship idea came first, the chicken or the egg, I don't know. But I was an intern there long back, 2016. All I did was just keeping the pulse on. The relationship, whether it was just once a year sending across a message, how are you doing, happy Christmas, how is your family. So be sure that whatever relationship you are building with your research communities, be sure to maintain them also. Not always for the purpose of research. Things will show up. If the relationship is there, we can find out more research. But if research is there, and then you want to build the relationship, possibly that is not a great way. And of course, one of the biggest challenges which I have learned through my journey is the rigorous effort to unlearn. It is not so easy to say, I don't know. It is not so easy to, the first time I was pushed into or to a community of transgender people, I had never seen 30 people combing their hair, talking in a different language, a complete different context altogether. I just didn't know what to talk. With a group of beggars, I didn't know how to begin a dialogue, a conversation. What do I ask a beggar? What is your monthly income per day? What does health inequity mean to you per day, every day? What do I even ask? So many a times, we might feel that what we generally see as a community is much more beyond than that, and we might not have the basic skills of even starting a conversation with some of these people who are so-called the priority populations of our research. I'll end with again another African philosophy, which means Ubuntu, which is called Ubuntu. Ubuntu means because of you, I am. So because possibly the community was there. And so by and by, of course, I'm realizing that I am learning it, but I'm possibly still learning it. And yeah, this was a fantastic picture. While I was doing one of my most serious meetings, the chicken was sitting and sleeping on the slippers. And I felt it was so fascinating. Human beings do anything. Kind of an attitude. So thank you for that. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, and namaste. Once again, namaste.